A young girl walks 3 kilometers to catch a train to see her boyfriend. She never arrives. For 13 months, France searched desperately for answers. Then, in a stolen car hundreds of miles away, investigators found something that changed everything. This is the case of Lina Delsarte, and how cutting-edge forensics solved a mystery that gripped an entire nation. September 23, 2023, started like any other Saturday morning for the Delsarte family in the peaceful countryside of northeastern France. Lina Delsarte, just 15 years old, was preparing for what should have been a routine journey. A simple walk to the local train station followed by a trip to Strasbourg to visit her boyfriend. It was a journey she had made before without incident, through the quiet wine country of Alsace where violent crime was almost unthinkable. The Bas-Rhin region, with its mix of French and German cultural influences, was known for its picturesque villages, close-knit communities, and generally peaceful way of life. This was exactly the kind of place where parents felt comfortable letting their teenagers travel independently. Lina came from a loving, close-knit family who described her as responsible and mature beyond her years. Her relationship with her boyfriend in Strasbourg was serious enough that she made regular trips to see him, and her family's willingness to allow these visits spoke volumes about the trust they had in her judgment. She wasn't the type of teenager to act impulsively or disappear without explanation. When she left home that morning, she carried everything she needed for her visit, presumably a small bag with personal items, her phone, and money for the train ticket. The walk from Lina's home to Saint-Blaise-la-Roche station was approximately 3 kilometers through rural countryside, the kind of peaceful country roads where the biggest concern might typically be avoiding a farm vehicle or keeping an eye out for wildlife. These weren't busy highways or urban streets, but rather quiet paths through the landscape that had remained virtually unchanged for generations. Lina left with plenty of time to make her planned train connection, as missing it could mean waiting hours for the next one in rural France's less frequent service schedule. But somewhere along that familiar route, on that seemingly ordinary Saturday morning, Lina Delsarte simply vanished. When she failed to arrive in Strasbourg at the expected time, her boyfriend's attempts to reach her by phone went unanswered. For any teenager maintaining a relationship, not answering phone calls would be highly unusual, and alarm bells began ringing almost immediately. Her family's response was swift and decisive. They knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a case of a rebellious teenager deciding to go somewhere else or acting out. Lina's character and reliability meant her family understood immediately that she was in danger. Local police were contacted without delay, and the initial missing person report was filed. In France, there's no mandatory waiting period before reporting a minor missing, and the local gendarmerie took the report seriously given Lina's age and the unusual circumstances. The first searches focused on retracing the route Lina would have taken to the train station. Family members, neighbors, and local volunteers scoured her expected path, looking desperately for any sign of what might have happened to her. What followed was one of France's most intensive and heart-wrenching missing person investigations. When local searches failed to locate any trace of Lina, the case was quickly escalated to regional authorities and specialized units with experience in missing person cases and potential criminal investigations. Large-scale search operations were organized, involving not just police officers but also volunteer search and rescue teams who expanded their efforts far beyond Lina's planned route to include surrounding forests, fields, waterways, and any location where she might have ended up. Modern search technology was deployed extensively in the effort to find Lina. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras scanned vast areas of countryside from above, particularly useful for covering the rural terrain efficiently. Ground teams used GPS coordination to ensure systematic coverage of search areas, while drones provided aerial reconnaissance and access to difficult terrain. Specially trained search dogs were brought in to try to pick up Lina's scent along her intended route, though these highly skilled animals, capable of following scent trails days or weeks old under the right conditions, apparently found no clear trail to follow. The digital forensics aspect of the investigation proved equally frustrating. Investigators immediately attempted to track Lina's phone, looking for the last known location where it connected to cell towers, and examined her social media accounts, text messages, and call history for any clues about her state of mind or suspicious contacts. However, one of the most troubling aspects of her disappearance was that her phone appeared to have been turned off or destroyed shortly after she left home. For a teenager whose phone would normally be a constant lifeline for communication, entertainment, and navigation, this silence suggested either that she was in a location with no service, unlikely given the populated nature of her route, or that something had happened to prevent her from using it. The disappearance galvanized the local community in a way that demonstrated the strong social bonds characteristic of rural French communities. Volunteers organized extensive search parties, distributed flyers with Lina's photo throughout the region, and coordinated closely with authorities to cover as much ground as possible. Local businesses displayed her photograph in their windows, and community centers became informal headquarters for search coordination efforts. The solidarity was remarkable, but it also revealed an underlying tension and fear that such a thing could happen in their peaceful region. As days passed without any sign of Lina, the case began attracting regional and then national media attention. French television news programs began covering the story extensively, newspapers picked up the case, and social media campaigns kept her photo circulating widely. This media attention served multiple crucial purposes. It kept public attention focused on finding Lina, encouraged anyone with information to come forward, and put pressure on authorities to dedicate adequate resources to the investigation. However, it also put enormous additional pressure on her family, who had to balance their desire for privacy with their desperate need for public help. Given the proximity of Lina's home to the German border, investigators had to consider the possibility that she might have crossed into Germany, either voluntarily or involuntarily. This required careful coordination between French and German authorities, complicating the investigation but ensuring that all possibilities were explored. The international aspect added layers of bureaucratic complexity while investigators raced against time. Here's the fundamental problem that investigators faced. Rural crime scenes are incredibly difficult to solve through traditional methods. Unlike urban areas with extensive surveillance camera networks, these quiet country roads had minimal electronic monitoring. There were no traffic cameras to review, no security footage from businesses, no digital breadcrumbs to follow. Investigators had to depend heavily on witness accounts, physical evidence, and forensic analysis, but witnesses were scarce, and physical evidence seemed non-existent. As September turned into October, and October into November, the case entered the grinding, desperate phase that's unfortunately common in missing person investigations. The long search for answers when initial efforts have failed to produce results. During this period, investigators had to balance maintaining hope with the growing likelihood that Lina had been the victim of foul play. The extended uncertainty took an enormous toll on everyone involved, particularly Lina's family, who lived in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn fully because of hope that their daughter might still be alive, but also unable to move forward with their lives normally. Throughout the fall and winter of 2023, authorities repeatedly appealed for witnesses who might have seen Lina on the morning of her disappearance or noticed anything unusual in the area around that time. These appeals were broadcast on television, published in newspapers, and shared extensively on social media platforms. The hope was that someone might remember seeing her walking, or perhaps notice a vehicle or person that seemed out of place in the quiet rural setting. Weather became a factor as the search continued through France's harsh winter months. Snow, freezing temperatures, and shorter daylight hours made outdoor search efforts more difficult and dangerous. Any physical evidence that might have existed outdoors could have been damaged, moved, or concealed by the elements. The changing seasons also meant that search techniques had to be adapted, and some areas that had been searched in autumn needed to be re-examined once snow melted in spring. By this point, Lina's case had become a national story that resonated across France. Her photograph was familiar to people throughout the country, and her case was regularly featured in true crime programs and newspaper articles. This level of attention helped keep the case active and in the public consciousness, but it also created additional challenges. The media and public began comparing Lina's case to other missing person cases in France and Europe, sometimes suggesting new investigative approaches, but also occasionally creating false expectations or sensationalizing aspects of the case in ways that weren't helpful to the actual investigation. As months passed with no significant breakthroughs, the investigation necessarily evolved from an active search for a missing person to a more complex criminal investigation. While investigators continued to hope Lina might be found alive, they also had to prepare for the possibility that they were dealing with a homicide case. This meant preserving all evidence meticulously, maintaining detailed records of every aspect of the investigation, and preparing for eventual prosecution if a suspect was identified. Then, after 13 long months of searching, everything changed with what initially appeared to be a completely routine police action. Officers recovered a stolen vehicle, and standard police procedure meant the car would undergo forensic examination. This typically involves fingerprint analysis, DNA sampling from surfaces that suspects might have touched, and examination of any items left in the vehicle. It's the kind of routine work that happens thousands of times across France every year, usually yielding mundane results that help prosecute car thieves or connect vehicles to minor crimes. But this time, the routine analysis yielded something extraordinary and horrifying. During the forensic examination of the stolen car, technicians discovered DNA evidence that matched Lina Delsarte. After more than a year of searching with virtually no physical evidence, investigators suddenly had the first concrete proof of what had happened to her and where she had been. The discovery immediately and definitively transformed the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide investigation. Modern DNA analysis can detect incredibly small amounts of genetic material and can distinguish between different types of DNA evidence, whether it came from blood, saliva, hair, or skin cells. The specific nature and location of the DNA evidence found in the car likely provided investigators with crucial information about what had happened to Lina inside that vehicle, painting a picture that confirmed their worst fears about her final hours. Beyond the DNA evidence, investigators discovered other deeply disturbing physical evidence in the car. They found rope that contained DNA from both Lina and an unknown suspect, suggesting that she had been restrained during her time in the vehicle. This physical evidence not only confirmed that a violent crime had occurred, but also provided crucial forensic material that would prove essential in identifying the perpetrator and understanding the nature of the crime. The DNA evidence led investigators directly to Samuel Gonin, a 43-year-old man whose genetic profile was already in police databases due to previous criminal activity. This identification represented a major breakthrough in the case, providing investigators with their first solid suspect after more than a year of searching. However, the identification also raised troubling new questions about how Gonin had encountered Lina, what his motives had been, and most urgently, what he had done with her. Gonin's criminal history revealed a deeply troubling pattern of violent behavior. He had previous convictions for armed robberies, indicating someone who was comfortable using violence against innocent victims and had a history of escalating criminal behavior. His background suggested that Lina's case might represent a tragic escalation from property crime to violent personal crime, though investigators would need to piece together exactly how and why he had targeted her. The profile that emerged of Samuel Gonin was that of a dangerous predator whose criminal behavior had been escalating over time. His history of robberies demonstrated his willingness to use violence for personal gain, and the evidence from Lina's case suggested either opportunistic violence or potentially more calculated predatory behavior. The fact that he had targeted a young woman walking alone indicated someone who was comfortable preying on vulnerable victims. Once Bas-Rhin was identified as the primary suspect, law enforcement agencies immediately began intensive efforts to locate and arrest him. This involved surveillance of known addresses, coordination with other law enforcement agencies across France, and monitoring of digital communications and financial transactions. The urgency of finding him was heightened by the very real possibility that he might commit additional crimes while free, and investigators worked around the clock to track him down. Bas-Rhin had been scheduled to appear in court in July 2024 for his previous robbery convictions. This court date represented what should have been the perfect opportunity for authorities to arrest him on the new charges related to Lina's murder. Investigators were preparing their case, gathering evidence, and coordinating what should have been a straightforward arrest at the courthouse. However, this opportunity for justice would never come due to a development that would forever deny Lina's family the chance to see their daughter's killer face trial. On July 10, 2024, just days before he could be arrested for Lina's murder, Bas-Rhin took his own life by hanging himself in Besançon. His suicide meant that he would never face trial for his alleged crimes against Lina. Investigators would never get the full story of what happened directly from the perpetrator, and most crucially, the location of Lina's remains would remain unknown. This development was devastating for Lina's family and deeply frustrating for investigators who had worked so tirelessly to identify him. Bas-Rhin's death created a complex situation that combined elements of closure with profound frustration. On one hand, investigators were confident they had identified the perpetrator based on solid DNA evidence and other forensic findings. The science was clear, and there was no doubt about his involvement in Lina's disappearance and murder. On the other hand, his death meant they would never get a confession, never learn his exact motives, never understand the full sequence of events, and never be able to prosecute him in court. Most importantly for the family, it meant that Lina's remains were still missing, and they still couldn't lay their daughter to rest. With Bas-Rhin dead and unable to reveal where he had taken Lina's body, investigators faced their most crucial challenge yet. Without the ability to interrogate the suspect or negotiate for information in exchange for legal considerations, they had to rely entirely on forensic evidence and advanced investigative techniques to determine where Lina might be found. This is where cutting-edge technology would prove absolutely crucial in bringing the case to its final resolution. The breakthrough came through GPS technology that most people take for granted in their daily lives. Modern vehicles, including the car Bas-Rhin had been using, contain sophisticated tracking systems that continuously record detailed location data. These systems, originally designed for navigation assistance and theft recovery, maintain comprehensive logs of where vehicles have traveled, complete with precise coordinates, timestamps, and even speed data. Forensic specialists worked painstakingly to extract and analyze GPS data from Bas-Rhin's vehicle, sorting through what would have been thousands of individual data points showing exact locations, times, and travel patterns. This process requires sophisticated technical analysis and considerable expertise, as investigators had to identify unusual patterns or locations that might be significant among all the routine travel data. They were looking for anomalies, places where Bas-Rhin had gone that didn't fit his normal patterns of movement or known activities. The GPS analysis revealed something both crucial and chilling. Bas-Rhin had traveled to areas far from where Lina had disappeared, including locations that had no apparent connection to his normal activities, work, or known associates. One location that immediately drew investigators' attention was an area near Nevers, approximately 300 kilometers from where Lina had vanished. This substantial distance suggested a calculated and deliberate effort to conceal evidence of his crime, rather than panic disposal close to the scene. Nevers is located in the Nièvre department in the Burgundy region of central France, quite different from the Alsatian countryside where Lina had lived. The area around Nevers includes both urban areas and extensive rural countryside, with forests and isolated areas that would appeal to someone trying to hide evidence of a serious crime. The GPS data showed that Ganin had spent considerable time in this region shortly after Lina's disappearance, with his vehicle remaining stationary in certain locations for extended periods. Armed with specific GPS coordinates rather than vast areas of countryside to search, investigators were finally able to focus their efforts with precision. Rather than the broad, area-wide searches that had characterized the early months of the investigation, they could now concentrate on specific locations where Ganin's vehicle had been recorded. This represented a complete transformation in search strategy, from hoping to find clues to having specific targets to investigate. The search near Nevers involved specialized teams trained specifically in recovering human remains in various conditions and environments. These teams employ a variety of sophisticated techniques, including ground-penetrating radar that can detect subsurface anomalies, cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains even after extended periods, and systematic excavation methods designed to preserve evidence while recovering remains. The search was methodical, scientific, and emotionally challenging for everyone involved. On October 16, 2024, more than 13 months after Lina's disappearance, search teams made the discovery that everyone had been simultaneously hoping for and dreading. Lina's remains were found in woods near Sermoise-sur-Loire, close to Nevers, exactly where the GPS data had suggested she might be. The discovery brought an end to the long, agonizing search for answers, but it also confirmed the tragic reality that Lina had been murdered and that her family's worst fears had been realized. Post-mortem examinations conducted by forensic pathologists confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Lina Delsarte, bringing scientific certainty to what the GPS evidence had strongly suggested. While the exact cause of death may never be fully determined due to the condition of the remains after more than a year and the effects of environmental exposure, the forensic evidence was entirely consistent with investigators' theories about what had happened to her. For Lina's family, the discovery of her remains brought an incredibly complex mixture of emotions that's difficult for anyone who hasn't experienced such a loss to fully comprehend. After more than a year of uncertainty, of hoping against hope that she might somehow still be alive, they finally had definitive answers about what had happened to their beloved daughter. However, those answers confirmed their deepest fears and forced them to confront the full reality that she had been the victim of a violent crime. While the family could finally begin the formal grieving process and lay Lina to rest, they also had to live with the knowledge that her killer would never face justice in a courtroom. The conclusion of Lina's case had a profound and lasting impact on the communities where she had lived and where her remains were ultimately found. In Alsace, her home region, there was relief that answers had finally been found after so many months of uncertainty, but also ongoing grief for a young life that had been cut tragically short. The case had fundamentally changed the community's sense of security and safety, particularly among parents of teenage children who had previously felt comfortable allowing their kids considerable independence. From the perspective of law enforcement, the case represented both remarkable success and deep frustration. They had successfully identified the perpetrator using advanced forensic techniques, had located the victim's remains using cutting-edge GPS analysis, and had employed every tool of modern criminal investigation to solve what had initially seemed like an impossible case. However, the suspect's suicide meant they couldn't achieve the ultimate goal of criminal prosecution and formal justice served in a courtroom. The Lina Delsarte case stands as a powerful demonstration of how far forensic science and criminal investigation have evolved in the modern era. DNA analysis that could detect minute traces of genetic material in a stolen car, GPS tracking technology that could reveal the movements of vehicles with precise accuracy, and digital forensics that could piece together complex patterns of behavior. All of these played crucial roles in solving a crime that would have remained an unsolvable mystery just a few decades ago. The case also reveals uncomfortable truths about the nature of violent crime and personal safety in contemporary society. It demonstrated that dangerous predators can strike anywhere, even in communities that consider themselves among the safest in the world. Lina's quiet Saturday morning walk to the train station in peaceful rural France became her family's worst nightmare, shattering assumptions about safety that rural communities had long taken for granted. While Samuel Gonin escaped formal legal justice through his suicide, he did not escape the truth. Modern forensic science ensured that Lina's story was told, her killer was identified and exposed, and her family was given the answers they desperately needed. The case proves that even when traditional justice is denied, the persistence of investigators and the power of technology can still reveal the truth and provide some measure of resolution. Lina Delsarte's case will be remembered not merely as another tragic crime, but as a testament to the extraordinary power of persistence, cutting-edge technology, and the unwavering determination of investigators and family members who refuse to give up on finding the truth. Her story demonstrates that even in our most desperate moments, science and human dedication can work together to ensure that victims are not forgotten and that the truth, however painful, eventually comes to light. If you found this case as compelling and important as we did, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into cases where science, determination, and modern investigative techniques solve seemingly impossible mysteries. And remember, if you have information about any unsolved case in your area, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem, don't hesitate to contact your local authorities. You never know what piece of the puzzle you might hold, and your information could be the key that brings answers to another family desperately searching for the truth.